During training, the quiet guy suddenly became the most terrifying person there. We were 3 days into corporate security training at this conference center outside Dallas when everything changed. I arrived at the conference center outside Dallas on a Monday morning in early spring. The security training was mandatory for all regional managers in our retail chain. I checked in at the front desk and received my name badge along with a folder of training materials. Pierce introduced himself as our instructor for the 3-day loss prevention course. He was tall, with the confident posture of someone who'd spent years in security. His opening speech was brief and to the point. Retail theft costs businesses billions every year, he said. By the end of these 3 days, you'll have the tools to significantly reduce those losses at your locations. We went around the room introducing ourselves, 12 retail managers from different stores across the region, all there to learn how to catch shoplifters. Most people mentioned their background or why they were interested in security. When it was Nolan's turn, he barely looked up from his notepad. I'm Nolan. I work at an electronics store, looking to move into security eventually. His voice was so quiet that Pierce asked him to repeat himself. He did, slightly louder, then immediately went back to writing notes in tiny, precise handwriting. I wouldn't have remembered him at all if not for what happened later. The morning session covered basic shoplifting prevention techniques. Pierce showed us how to spot suspicious behavior and the most commonly stolen items. We practiced observing customers without being obvious about it. Terrell sat next to me during the role-playing exercises. He managed a sporting goods store in Houston and had a great sense of humor. We partnered up for most of the morning activities. What do you think of this training so far? Terrell asked during our lunch break. Seems pretty basic to me. I agreed. Most of it was common sense, but I appreciated the structured approach. We ate our sandwiches in the conference center cafeteria while discussing theft problems at our stores. Nolan sat alone in the corner. He didn't speak to anyone during lunch. He just ate quickly while reviewing his notes, then returned to the training room before everyone else. The afternoon session was more interesting. Pierce showed surveillance footage of actual theft attempts from various retail environments. We were supposed to identify the suspicious behavior before the theft occurred. Most of us caught the obvious signs. Customers wearing oversized coats in summer, people lingering too long in blind spots, the classic distraction techniques. But then something unexpected happened. Nolan raised his hand during one video that showed a woman with a stroller in a department store. She's not watching the baby, he said. And if you freeze the frame at 17 seconds, you can see she's wearing an earpiece. Pierce looked surprised. That's correct. She's part of a team. The earpiece wasn't mentioned in our training materials. Nolan pointed out 3 more details that none of us had noticed. The way the woman positioned herself to block camera angles, the hand signals she used when security walked by, the timing pattern of her movements through the store. Grant, a former military guy who managed a hardware store, turned around to look at Nolan. How do you know all that? That's some advanced surveillance awareness. Nolan shrugged. Just observant, I guess. The rest of the afternoon, I found myself watching Nolan instead of the videos. He sat perfectly still, except for his hand taking notes. His eyes never left the screen. He didn't fidget or shift like the rest of us. When the session ended at 5, Nolan was the first one out the door. He declined Terrell's invitation to join a group for dinner, just gathered his materials and left without saying goodbye to anyone. That guy is weird, Terrell said as we walked to the hotel restaurant that evening. Did you notice how he knew all that stuff about surveillance techniques? I nodded. Maybe he has previous security experience he didn't mention. The hotel bartender brought our drinks and mentioned he'd seen Nolan leaving the property earlier. The quiet guy from your group? He declined room service and said he wouldn't be back until morning. Devin, another manager from our training, joined us at the table. I tried looking him up online during the break. The electronics store he mentioned doesn't seem to exist in the directory. That's when we realized none of us knew anything about Nolan beyond his name. He'd been completely forgettable during introductions, but his knowledge of security was anything but ordinary. Maybe we should ask Pierce about him tomorrow, I suggested. It's strange that he knows so much but is trying to blend into the background. Terrell agreed. Something doesn't add up about that guy. Nobody learns those kinds of details just from working at an electronics store. We finished our dinner and headed to our rooms, but I couldn't stop thinking about Nolan, how he'd transformed from completely forgettable to the center of our attention in just one afternoon. And why someone with his obvious expertise would be sitting in a basic loss prevention course with retail managers. I fell asleep wondering what day 2 would bring. I had no idea how much stranger things were about to get. Day 2 of training began with Pierce demonstrating proper restraint techniques. The morning sun streamed through the conference room windows as we gathered around the practice mats. Pierce explained the legal implications of physically restraining a shoplifter. Remember, this is about control, not pain, he said. I need a volunteer to help demonstrate. The room went quiet. No one raised their hand. Pierce scanned the group and his eyes landed on Nolan in the back corner. Nolan, how about you? Come up and help me demonstrate the proper technique. Nolan hesitated. He closed his notebook slowly and walked to the front of the room. His movements were precise, almost mechanical. I'll need another volunteer to play the role of shoplifter, Pierce said. Terrell, you up for it? Terrell nodded and joined them at the front. Pierce instructed him to act as if he were trying to flee with merchandise. Terrell made a show of stuffing an imaginary item under his jacket. Now, Nolan, show us how you would restrain him, Pierce said. What happened next stunned everyone. Nolan moved with lightning speed. He grabbed Terrell's arm and twisted it behind his back in one fluid motion. His grip was perfect, textbook form that looked nothing like a beginner's attempt. Terrell winced in actual pain. Ease up, man. Pierce stepped forward quickly. That's enough. This is practice only, Nolan. We're not making actual arrests here. Nolan released his hold immediately. He mumbled an apology, and returned to his seat. The room was silent for several seconds. That was very effective, Pierce said, trying to break the tension. But remember, in retail security, our goal is minimal force. The rest of the morning session continued with other volunteers. No one asked Nolan to demonstrate again. During the lunch break, I sat with Terrell and a few others in the cafeteria. That hurt like hell, Terrell said, rubbing his wrist. Where does an electronics store clerk learn to do that? Andre joined our table with his sandwich. You guys need to see this. I just spotted Nolan outside on a phone call. We moved to the window. Nolan stood in the parking lot with his back to the building. His entire demeanor had changed. His shoulders were squared, his posture straight and commanding. He was gesturing sharply with his free hand. That doesn't look like the same person, Terrell whispered. I stepped outside, pretending to take a call myself. I positioned myself near enough to hear fragments of Nolan's conversation. His voice was completely different, deeper, authoritative, perimeter secure, negative on surveillance. Timeline unchanged, he said into the phone. Roger that. Will maintain position. It sounded like military code. Nothing like the soft-spoken retail worker from yesterday. When he turned and saw me, his expression changed instantly. The authority vanished, replaced by the forgettable persona we'd met on day one. Nice weather, he said with an awkward smile before hurrying back inside. The afternoon session focused on de-escalation techniques for aggressive customers. Pierce played videos showing confrontations in retail settings. Throughout the session, Nolan checked his phone constantly. His eyes darted to the door whenever someone entered the room. After training ended, Terrell and I headed to the business center at the hotel. We searched online for the electronics store Nolan had mentioned. Nothing came up. Let's try his name, Terrell suggested. We found dozens of Nolans, but none matching our guy. No social media profiles, no professional listings, nothing that connected to retail or electronics. This is weird, I said. It's like he doesn't exist. A group of us planned dinner at a restaurant near the hotel. Devin invited Nolan, who declined without hesitation. Can't make it. Prior commitment, he said before walking quickly toward the exit. Devin exchanged looks with us. I'm going to follow him, just to see what's up. 20 minutes later, Devin joined us at the restaurant, slightly out of breath. You won't believe this! Nolan met with two men in a black SUV in the parking lot. They looked serious, suits, earpieces, the whole deal. When we returned to the hotel later, Tatum the bartender waved me over. Your quiet friend was asking some strange questions earlier. What kind of questions? I asked. Wanted to know about the building security layout, camera positions, access points, staff schedules. Said it was for a paper he was writing on hotel security. We headed upstairs, unsettled by this new information. Around midnight, I couldn't sleep, and went down to the lobby for some water. The night manager was reviewing security footage on his monitor. Everything okay? I asked. He pointed to the screen. Just checking something strange. One of your conference attendees has been walking the perimeter of the property for the past hour. On the grainy footage, Nolan moved methodically around the hotel grounds. He wasn't strolling, he was patrolling, checking doors and windows, scanning the tree line beyond the parking lot. Does he do this every night? I asked. The manager nodded. Since you all checked in, always around 2 a.m., never seen anything like it. I returned to my room with more questions than answers. Nolan wasn't just strange, he was something else entirely. The quiet, forgettable guy from day one was clearly a cover for someone with very specific training. As I tried to fall asleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring everything to a head. Whatever Nolan was really doing here, day 3 would reveal it. I just hoped we weren't in danger. Day 3 began with a subtle but unmistakable shift in the room. Nolan had moved his seat from the back corner to a position against the wall with clear sightlines to all exits. His notebook lay closed on the table in front of him. Pierce started the morning session with a review of everything we'd learned so far. I couldn't focus on his words. My attention kept drifting to Nolan, who sat perfectly still, except for his eyes, which constantly scanned the room. Around 11, Nolan's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and immediately stood up. Pierce paused mid-sentence, as Nolan walked briskly toward the door. Bathroom break, Nolan muttered without making eye contact. Through the window, I watched him step outside. The transformation was instant and complete. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted. His entire body language shifted from forgettable retail worker to something entirely different. He spoke into his phone with sharp, precise gestures. Even from a distance, I could see the authority in his stance. This was not the same person who had introduced himself 2 days ago. When he returned 10 minutes later, he tried to resume his meek persona, but something had changed. The mask was slipping. During the lunch break, Caleb approached Nolan's table with a friendly smile. I positioned myself close enough to hear their conversation. Electronics business must be interesting, Caleb said, setting down his sandwich. What store did you say you worked at again? Nolan gave a tight smile. Just a small place. Nothing special. Been there long? Caleb pressed. Few years. Nolan's eyes never stopped moving. He scanned the doorways, the windows, the other participants. His food remained untouched. Planning to use this training for a security position, Caleb continued. Nolan checked his watch. Something like that? The conversation died as Nolan offered nothing more. Caleb eventually gave up and rejoined our table. That guy is definitely not who he says he is, Caleb whispered. He didn't even remember the store name he gave on day 1. When we returned to the training room after lunch, Pierce announced the afternoon session would focus on de-escalation techniques. He wanted to demonstrate with role-playing exercises. We'll practice handling aggressive customers, Pierce explained. I need volunteers to act out different scenarios. He consulted his clipboard. Let's start with Nolan. Come up here and we'll demonstrate the first technique. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Nolan, who remained seated for several long seconds. Then he stood up slowly. Something had changed completely. He no longer tried to appear small or forgettable. He walked to the front of the room with unmistakable authority. "That won't be necessary, Pierce," Nolan said, his voice deeper and clearer than we'd heard before. Pierce looked confused. "Excuse me?" Nolan made eye contact with everyone in the room for the first time. His gaze was direct and intense, nothing like the man who had barely looked up during introductions. "I apologize for the deception," Nolan said, "but we need to end this session immediately." The door opened and a uniformed police officer stepped in. He nodded to Nolan and pulled Pierce aside for a quick, urgent conversation. Pierce's face drained of color as he listened. He stepped back and deferred to Nolan with a nod. "My name is Special Agent Nolan Reeves," Nolan announced to the stunned room. "I'm with the FBI Counterterrorism Division." He reached under his jacket and produced a badge and identification card. His movements were fluid and practiced. "This training session has been compromised," he continued. "We have credible intelligence of a security threat to this facility." The police officer stepped forward. "I'm Officer Seth Daniels with Dallas PD. We've been working with Agent Reeves on this operation for several weeks." Nolan moved toward the windows, checking the parking lot. "For the past 3 months, we've been tracking a domestic terror cell targeting shopping centers across the Southwest. Their primary focus has been retail security protocols." Terrell stood up. "So you're not actually a retail manager?" "No," Nolan said. "My cover was designed to observe this training while monitoring for potential threats. We had reason to believe one of the terrorists might attempt to infiltrate this program." Suddenly, Nolan's phone buzzed. He checked it and his expression hardened. "We have confirmation. Hostile presence detected on the premises." He turned to Officer Daniels. "Initiate evacuation protocol." Nolan moved to the door with practiced efficiency. "Everyone stay calm and follow Officer Daniels out the east exit. Move quickly, but don't run." He pulled Pierce aside. "Secure the training materials. Nothing leaves this room." I watched in amazement as Nolan transformed completely. The quiet, forgettable man from day one was gone. In his place stood someone who commanded the room with absolute authority. "Terrell Andre, assist with the evacuation," Nolan directed. "Devin, stay with me. I need your help securing the perimeter." We followed his instructions without question. As we moved toward the exit, I heard sirens approaching in the distance. "Single file. Maintain visual contact with the person in front of you," Nolan called out. His voice carried effortlessly, cutting through the growing panic. Outside, more police vehicles arrived. Officers in tactical gear deployed around the building. Nolan coordinated with them using terminology I didn't understand. "Bravo team, secure the north entrance. Delta, sweep the conference rooms. We have potential hostile actors on the second floor." I stood with the others in the parking lot, watching as the forgettable retail manager from day one directed a full-scale tactical operation with absolute command. "Was any of the training real?" I asked Officer Daniels as we waited. He nodded. "All of it was legitimate. Pierce is actually a former federal agent himself. The training was real, but it also served as cover for Agent Reeves' operation." 20 minutes later, Nolan emerged from the building. He walked directly to our group, his posture completely different from the hunched figure we'd met on Monday. "The threat has been contained," he said. "2 suspects in custody. No injuries." He looked at each of us. "I apologize for the deception. It was necessary for operational security." Terrell shook his head in disbelief. "So the whole quiet, awkward thing was an act?" Nolan almost smiled. "The best covers are the ones people don't look at twice. Being forgettable was the point." As police and federal agents secured the scene around us, I realized how completely we'd all been fooled. The person we thought was the least remarkable member of our group had been the most dangerous all along. Nolan checked his phone one last time before addressing us. "You'll all be debriefed individually. After that, you're free to go home." He paused, then added, "For what it's worth, you were all excellent retail managers. That part wasn't an act." Then he turned and walked back toward the building, speaking rapidly into his radio, every inch the federal agent he'd been all along. The authorities swarmed the conference center within minutes. Police cruisers and unmarked federal vehicles filled the parking lot. I watched from behind the police line as they escorted a man in handcuffs from the building. Nolan directed the operation with calm efficiency. He moved between tactical teams, giving precise instructions and receiving updates through his earpiece. The forgettable retail worker had completely vanished. Officer Daniels gathered our group under a tree, away from the commotion. They found explosive materials in a maintenance closet on the second floor. The suspect was posing as cleaning staff. We stood in stunned silence. The reality of what could have happened hit me like a physical blow. I was terrified. 30 minutes later, Nolan approached our group. His posture was completely different from the hunched figure we'd met on day one. He stood tall with unmistakable authority. "I owe you all an explanation," he said. "My name is Special Agent Nolan Reeves, FBI Counterterrorism Division. For the past 6 months, we've been tracking a domestic terror cell targeting retail centers." Terrell shook his head in disbelief. "So everything about you was fake?" "Not everything," Nolan replied. "The training itself was legitimate. Pierce is a former federal agent who cooperated with our operation. Pierce joined us, looking apologetic. I was briefed about the potential threat 2 weeks ago. Agent Reeves needed a believable cover to monitor the situation." Officer Seth stepped forward. "Agent Reeves is one of our most decorated counterterrorism specialists. His team has prevented over a dozen major attacks in the past 3 years." Nolan looked uncomfortable with the praise. "My job was to appear completely unremarkable. The most effective surveillance happens when people don't notice you're watching." "Is that why you acted so awkward and forgettable?" I asked. He nodded. "The quiet, Nervous guy taking notes in the corner rarely draws attention. It allowed me to observe everyone while maintaining my cover. Devin crossed his arms. But you slipped up. We started noticing inconsistencies. That was unavoidable once we identified the threat, Nolan admitted. My priority shifted from maintaining cover to ensuring your safety. Eliza from the facility administration joined our group with a stack of paperwork. We're implementing new security protocols immediately. Agent Reeves will be consulting on the improvements. The next hour was a blur of debriefings and statements. Federal agents interviewed each of us about what we'd observed during the training. They were particularly interested in anything unusual we'd noticed. Nolan found me as I finished my statement. I want to apologize personally for the deception. It was necessary, but I know it's not easy to learn someone isn't who they claim to be. Were we ever in real danger? I asked. His expression turned serious. Yes, the suspect was planning to detonate during tomorrow's retail conference. Over 200 potential victims. I felt sick. How did you know to look here? Intelligence chatter pointed to this training as a potential target. These courses provide valuable information about retail security protocols, exactly what terrorists need to plan attacks. Nolan's phone buzzed. He checked it quickly. I have to go. The operation is still active. Before leaving, he looked at our group one last time. For what it's worth, you're all excellent at what you do. That part wasn't an act. We were released late that afternoon. The news reports downplayed the incident, describing it only as a security exercise at a Dallas conference center. No mention of explosives or arrests. I drove home the next day, trying to process everything that had happened. The quiet, forgettable man who'd transformed into a commanding federal agent. The narrow escape from disaster. The strange reality of having been part of a counterterrorism operation without knowing it. 3 days after returning to my store, I received an encrypted email. The sender was listed only as NR. Thank you for your unwitting assistance. Your observations were more helpful than you know. Stay vigilant. N. 6 months later, our training group held a reunion dinner in Dallas. Nolan wasn't there, but a secure message arrived at the restaurant. Still watching, still protecting, still forgettable when needed. The security certification arrived in the mail the following week. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. The best security is the kind nobody notices. You passed the real test. I returned to my retail job with a completely different perspective. I found myself watching for the quiet, forgettable people, the ones nobody noticed. I understood now that true vigilance wasn't about looking for threats, but recognizing when something ordinary was just a little too perfect in its ordinariness. Last Tuesday, a customer came into my store. Average height, unremarkable features. He browsed without making eye contact. Nobody else noticed him, but I did. I noticed how he positioned himself with clear sightlines to all exits, how his eyes never stopped scanning, how he moved with subtle precision. Our eyes met briefly. He gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement before disappearing into the crowd. I never saw him again, but I knew Nolan's lesson had stuck with me. The most dangerous people in any room are the ones you'd never remember were there.